She also did a study of dually, which is like every single script in the English-speaking world, and found that if it was written by a man with a male protagonist, it was most likely to be produced. If it was written by a man with a female protagonist, it was the second most likely to be produced. It was written by a woman with a male protagonist, it was the third likely to be produced. And if it was written by a woman with a female protagonist, it really didn't have much of a shot. So that was pretty shocking. And we got a third New York Times article. So all those articles came out in around a year. Boom, boom, boom. And the next programmable year, it went from 12.5% to 38.9%. It was amazing.
I want to be a producer with a hit show on Broadway.
You're listening to the Producer's Perspective Podcast with your host, Tony Award winner, Ken Davenport.
Hey everybody, it's Ken Davenport here. In just a few moments, we're going to get to the podcast with Julia Jordan, where she's going to tell you this shocking story about how she had to change her play to get it produced. You won't believe it, and it's one of the reasons she's such an advocate for gender parity in the theater. Make sure you listen all the way through to get that story. In the meantime, this podcast is brought to you by Daniel Rader Photography. Visit danielraderphoto.com for all of your photography needs for your show, for your headshot, for whatever it is. I was just on Daniel's website. We've used him a bunch of times. He does great work. And I just love his philosophy about photography. Listen to this quote. "The photos act as a passport. At their best, they transport us to the time, place, and heart of remarkable moments." I mean, that's the type of person you want taking your photos. So check out Daniel Rader, RADER, photo.com, and give him a shout if you need some photos for your show. And now, on to the podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Producer's Perspective podcast. My name is Ken Davenport. I'm thrilled you're with us today. I want to thank you all for the positive comments you've been throwing up on iTunes and everywhere, actually. And if you haven't done so, please give us a good review and throw up a comment for us. I'd appreciate it, as would our guests. And speaking of guests, we have a very, very talented playwright on the podcast today. I want you to welcome the very highly decorated playwright, Julia Jordan. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you for having me.
So Julia is a fellow like 18 times over. She is a Jonathan Larson Award winner, a Juilliard Playwright Fellow, an MTC Fellow, Lucille Lortel Fellow, a Kleban Award winner. She is the writer behind Murder Ballad, which I was a big fan of, both at MTC and You Move Downtown well. I assume that's being done all over the country now.
Yes.
Also, I was a huge fan of the Mice part of Harold Prince's the three one-acts. Sarah Plainenthal, the Moscow Circus, Winter Queen, Dark Yellow Boy, many, many, many others. She's the founder of the Lillys Awards, which was started to honor the work of women in the theater. And she has been very involved in conducting a very interesting and important study on gender parity in the theater, which we're going to get to in a little bit. But I wanted to start with this. Is it true that before you were in the theater, you moved to New York to become a painter?
That is true. I originally was just interested in the visual arts. All my high school years were dedicated to that. I lived in the studio, and then I just had to come to New York, so I only applied to schools in New York City. And I got here and found out that I was a big fish in a very small pond back in Minnesota, and adjusted my desires and segued from one thing to another, and eventually theater.
So you came here to be a painter, and you were like, wow, there's so many artists here. I should try something else. So you jumped into the theater because there was no competition there.
Well, I think what I did was I discovered, and I often, when I used to teach, I'd say, it's very important to know what your talents are, but it's very important to know what they're not. You see a lot of people, really pursuing something, and it's not actually what they're the best at. And I think I love drawing, but I was never going to be a real artist. And I've always read and was always writing. My mom always said I was going to be a writer, and I'd be like, no, absolutely not. It sounded boring and quiet. So I started working in restaurants, and all of the other waiters were in acting school, and it sounded like they were having a lot more fun than I was in college. they started bringing scenes in to study before their work started. And I don't know, I guess I started becoming their literature consultant, explaining to them what the Shakespeare scene was actually about, got more and more interested in what they were doing and the scripts themselves, and went to acting school. And I had this wonderful teacher, Mr. Pinter, at the neighborhood playhouse, who, after they assigned the personal monologue. So you're supposed to write something that happened in your past and then give it as a monologue, but it was true to you. So you didn't have to do that sort of work to take on another character. I wrote one that went really, really well and made everybody cry. It was a little bit of a cheat. I was lying a tiny bit. There was some embellishment going on, but it went well. And then Pinter said to me that he wanted me to bring in 3 pages of writing every week and meet with him privately. And I would bring those pages in and I would hand them to him and he would put them in a drawer. And then he would just say, okay, now who's sleeping with who? And we would just talk about trash, about everyone. I kept him updated. He never said a word about the work. He never said a word about the writing, but he made me do 3 pages a week. And then we had a gossip session. It was like one of the greatest teaching moments. I mean, it was just, I love him so much.
I love that story because I am such a big believer in just producing stuff, no pun intended. No matter what you're doing, whether you're painting, whether you're writing, whether you're producing theater, whether you're, becoming a professional golfer, it's just out there and doing whatever it is you want to do. But I want to go back to this very insightful, objective moment you had about yourself and your skills as a painter. You were how old when you were like, well, I'm good, but I'm not that good?
18, 19.
So that's a very young age to have that kind of objectivity. Do you know was there a moment?
I'm very opinionated.
Even about yourself?
No, honestly, I just looked around and I just listened and I heard and I was just like, wow, you know what? My heart isn't as deeply in this. I could just, when you're in a painting class or a drawing class and you walk around and you see everyone's work, I mean, if you have a feeling for the arts, it's pretty obvious, like if you hear a lot of poets back to back, it's really obvious, you feel it when you go into the theater, when it's on fire, you just do.
It's so true. And I think there's 2 types of people that come to New York, because I had the exact same story. So I came to New York to be a performer. And I went to Tisch at NYU, and I came in like, I am amazing because I just did West Side Story.
Yeah, I got a bunch of awards.
Community theater. I'm going to be fantastic. And I was fine. I was fine.
Right.
But I started to look around at all these other people going like, that's a real performer. Right
exactly.
There.
Yeah.
And I had 2 choices: pack up and go home, right? And be a lawyer. Or find something else in the business or the art that I still loved, which I obviously did in producing. And it sounds like you did the same thing.
Yeah. And then I did it again after acting school. I auditioned. I was an actress for 1 day. I literally went on 1 day of auditions. And at the end of it, I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this. I'm just not doing it. Like, no. Absolutely. I didn't like the life. I didn't like the process. I didn't like what I was being allowed to audition for. I was like, I can do better than that, So it was very obvious to me.
So what gave you the confidence to say, but this writing thing, this is for me. I got this. I can do this.
People's response. I could see that it was affecting people. After I wrote that first monologue at school, my girlfriend started using it as an audition piece. And then we were all auditioning for the same stuff, or they were. And so they were, can we have some more of them? Because they were going back to back and doing the exact same piece. So I was like, okay. So I came up with a couple more, and then I had a bunch of them. And then a friend of mine's boyfriend started a theater company up in the Bronx called the Belmont Italian American Playhouse. And it was literally financed by all the merchants in Belmont. So his first show, it was really funny. It was me and Girgis. And I can't remember the third person, but it was just like these sort of one acts. I think it was pretty early in Stephen's career too. I mean, we had never met each other. So they did 3 of my monologues as a piece of this evening. And I was sitting next to, it was just all the local merchants. So they each had like Mike's Cheese Shop, and like a little plaques on every single chair. And they're all in the beginning. It took a while to start the show because everybody was looking for their own chair that had their name on it. And I was sitting next to this woman who primarily spoke Italian. She only spoke a little English. She was an elderly woman, and she was watching the show. She had no idea that I had written it. And she kept like grabbing my hand and laughing and crying and just like shaking my hand and sort of talking back a little bit. And I just spent the entire night, I didn't even take it seriously. I hadn't really attended the rehearsals. I was like, yeah, you can do whatever you want in the Bronx. I'll come, And then I spent the entire night just like watching her watch it. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to write a real one. Not just a monologue. I'm going to see if I can get people to talk to each other. And I gone to the Playhouse, and Meisner was kind of great. It's kind of great training for writers.
And what was the first full-length play where people actually spoke to each other?
I wrote a 10-minute play called Night Swim that is still done a lot, actually. It's like, it was at Humana, and it's been published a bunch of times, and I still get tons of requests for it. It's based on a true story. It's about 2 girls who went skinny dipping and got caught by the police. And then the police asked us, this is actually a true story about me, but it asked me and my girlfriend to like come out of the lake, because we grew up in Minnesota, without our clothes. And we were like, no, at first. And then, but they were really, and they had flashlights, the whole bed. And finally I did. And then she followed me, and it was really traumatic. And then the next summer, Tanya, who's my good friend, who just literally just visited me last week, was like, let's go skinny dipping, because it's Minnesota, it's hot, whatever. I don't know. So she was like, let's do it. And I was like, I don't really want to, because I'm kind of scared about it. And she talked me into it. And so that's the play, her talking me into it.
Wow.
Yeah.
How much of so you did that thing of like, I wrote what I know, right? It's a true story from your life. How much of all of your work is based on some essence of truth from your life? Is that where you get a lot of your ideas, half your ideas, none of your ideas?
I think initially there's always something that's a touchstone, or is like, if you put my true life into like a refracting mirror and change genders and the country and the time period and that kind of stuff, there's always something. But I hadn't written a play for 10 years, and I just wrote one, and it's the most straight up true thing I've ever written. So we'll see.
What's the difference between writing a play and a musical for you? Is it the same process? Is it? No, it's not. And sometimes I think if my plays were more informed by my musicals, and my musicals more informed by my plays, it would really get somewhere. But no, when I do musicals, I think because I started writing them for children, but I think also it's just true. At least it's true for me, because I write a story. I really do write a beginning, middle, and end. For me, it's all about clarity, especially when you're working with other people, and they have to really know exactly where you are and exactly what the scene needs. And songs can, there's some that are very effective at really moving the plot along, but sometimes they're, as much as we want them to be, they're actually not as effective as they could be, or not as they could be, but as the scene can be, in terms of being really, really heard. So clarity, the scene surrounding that moment of transition has to be, I think, really tight. And when I'm writing a play, I think I feel more of a sense of writer indulgence. Do you think anything can be made into a musical? Any idea? Or does it have to have a certain something? I'm not formally educated in musicals, so I would go with, I think anything could, but I can't promise that I could do anything. There's probably somebody. I don't know. I mean, it depends on the audience too, right? What kind of audience are you going for? When you write, that's an interesting question. When you write, what audience do you write for? When you sit down and write a play, Who are you writing it for? Are you writing it for yourself? Are you thinking, oh, this is for a Broadway audience, a dinner theater audience, a children's audience? Or do you think about them at all?
I do think about them a lot. I think when I write for children, I've always been told that the stuff is too advanced for the kids that I'm going at, and they are always wrong. The kids they're only interested in what they don't understand or what's beyond them. So there's that. I think about that a lot. But I also think about like demographic audience. I guess I'm writing for my people. I'm writing for my group mostly, specifically. But I don't think my work is not very far to the side. It's pretty straight down the middle. It really is. I mean, for the audience that already attends theater. But I am some writers find this sort of gross or offensive, but I'm very into being in control of the audience's response. I think that's why I've been attracted to murders and mysteries, is because I really like to know. I find it really fascinating to have readings and find out all the different ways that people are taking in the information and where, the sweet spot of the vast majority of the audience actually understands what you think they should be understanding. I know a lot of other writers in work that they do, they are like, whatever you see in it, it's fine. But specifically when I'm doing like, a murder mystery, I really want people to follow the plot points exactly. So I'm interested in eliciting specific responses and having reversals and being more in control of that. But that, I don't know, maybe that'll change. But that's where I've been recently.
I know you've taught playwriting in the past, and what's the biggest flaw or mistake, we'll call it for lack of a better word, that you see from new playwrights or new writers starting off with their first or second play?
Oh, I don't know that I even think in those terms. I'm always sort of surprised at I'm not surprised, but I think people are doing different kinds of plays, like if I go see a Will Eno play, that's not what I'm trying to do, but I'm in awe of it, that's cool, So I don't think I really think about that, but I do sometimes think that it's sad to me, because I personally love this kind of theater, that sometimes I think in the past generation or two, we've kind of abdicated plot to film and TV, and I don't think we should.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah, I really don't think we should. I mean, I was once asked to go and do a guest teach spot at a very fancy playwriting program, and they sent me all the writer's scripts, and I was like, wow, I'd like to talk about plot. And they literally said, we don't teach plot here. I was like, well, you kind of should, because it's beautiful writing, but it doesn't actually need to be on a,
It's one of the, why I was such a huge fan of The Ferryman, because there's a real plot-driven story there. And actually, he's a brilliant writer, and everything I've seen, I was like, that's a brilliant writer.
And he's having a lot of fun.
But with The Ferryman, it was so much different than the other stuff for me, because it was such a story, so heavy on plot.
It is really fascinating. I haven't gone into TV because my life is so tied to New York, and I have children, and the Lillys started just as all the playwrights went to TV. But almost all of my close friends, and I'm not going to say all, but a lot of them had to really, after being accomplished playwrights, go, oh my God, to do this, I have to learn how this plot thing works, And I was like, all right, it's not hard, and it's really fun,
So you've had a lot of success in the stuff off Broadway. Sounds like even the 10-minute play is being licensed and done all over the place. But no Broadway show as of yet.
No.
Does that bum you out?
No.
So why not? A lot of people come to New York.
It does not help that, it doesn't hurt that I luckily am married to a doctor, so I don't need it. The other thing is I don't think, Murder Ballad is probably my most commercial show. I don't know. The ideas that I come up with in and of myself just don't scream Broadway. But I am starting to write something that might be more in that world just because of who the composer is. But, we'll see.
So you don't sit down and say, oh, I'm going to write a Broadway show now.
No, I don't think very many people do. But, I mean, it seems, to the stuff that I love on Broadway usually was not written to be on Broadway. It happened to catch fire and sort of graduate,
Like what's some of your favorite things you've seen in the last few years?
I mean, Hamilton, I don't think he was like, Broadway show, I mean.
Do you have any, what's your process for writing? Do you sit down at the same time every day? Do you have office hours?
No.
Anything to get you through writer's block?
No, I'm a mom. And so since childcare is a really big thing to the Lillys for this reason. But I think when I started having kids, your time is different. I mean, it's just not your own. It just doesn't belong to you anymore. And so before I had kids, if I was writing a play, I would basically just hole up for a month and I'd walk out and have a play. I would just stay up all night. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I started writing more musicals is they're more piecemeal. That's just more practical. There's more craft and not like, oh my God, I have to have my Jack Daniels and buy a pack of cigarettes. Like that's not really as necessary. So, and you can write a song a day. And then the Lillys just became a huge part of my life. And honestly, for the past few years, I think I'm kind of segueing out of it now in a weird way, even though it's a bigger deal than ever. But when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, somebody needs numbers or I need to call that person, I need to do something for the Lillys. And then my writing deadlines are kind of my own and it's more fluid and,
it's hard.
So it got taken over.
So you've mentioned the Lillys. Tell everyone exactly what the Lillys is in your words, which are better than mine.
So the Lillys started when Sarah Schulman, who's a playwright, emailed me saying it was her birthday and she wanted to have a party, but she wanted it to be all playwrights. And we came from sort of different schools. So I knew a group of writers and she knew a different group of writers. And she's like, let's get all the ladies together and bitch about this season because it was abysmal. And then she wrote me this email and she listed all of the major theaters that were producing exactly 0 women that year. And it was really long. It was longer than usual. And at that point, all of the statistics, and we were kind of used to the 1 in 5, 1 in 4 model.
Explain to everyone what that
So
is.
Most theaters would have, that did like 4 or 5 plays would do 4 white men and then 1 either woman or person of color. So this year, for some bizarre reason, I think, every once in a while they would just do an all white male season. But this one year, a lot of them did the all white male season at the same time. So it was pretty, So she sent me this email and this was 12 years ago now. So the going viral idea
like
was
50 years ago that would happen, not 12 years ago.
No, it was 12. And honestly, a lot has changed then. At that time, going viral was like a big, like new-ish idea, but it went viral. So we thought we were inviting, 15 people to come have wine at New Dramatists. And we started getting RSVPs from over 100. People just started passing around. People flew in from Los Angeles and Seattle. It was like a coming together. So Todd London was running New Dramatists at the time. And he was like, the New York Times has just heard about it and they want to write an article. And I was like, oh my God, we're going to have to like do something besides like buy cheap wine. So I started, he was like, you have to give a speech. I was like, okay. So that's when I first started actually researching it. Up to then, it was just personal pissed off. And then I started like looking at all these gender studies and being like, I had never studied gender classes in college. So I didn't really have any specific knowledge about it whatsoever. So I started reading all these studies and I was like, wow, all this research has been done. The orchestra study, the orchestra's auditioning behind the curtains. So I gave this speech, and at that meeting, all the women there decided, and one man, I think it was Adam Bach, and David Ajme came too. I think they were the only 2 men. They were supporters. So they came. we all decided that we need to speak to the artistic directors directly. So that was a problem because they didn't really want to come. Tim Sanford was the funniest because he said he already had a good record for producing women. And he was like, well, I'm not going to come because all the other artistic directors will hate me because I make them look bad. So I talked him into it. But they all ended up coming. And it was they really did come. And we had another meeting. And again, it was over 100 people. And the Times did another article about it. And then because I'd been reading all these studies, I just emailed Cecilia Rouse, who now runs the whole economics department at Princeton. And she was on the Obama's first economic council. I mean, she's a huge deal. I called her up or emailed her and asked her if maybe we could do a study about women in theater, because she had done the orchestra study. And she was like, well, let's have coffee. I was like, okay. So I went out there and she essentially gave me her star student. And so Emily Sands was being courted by all of the programs across the country. Chicago, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all of them. And she had been out at Chicago, where I just happened to have gone to high school with Steve Levitt of Freakonomics. And I had asked him as well, we need some help, So he pitched my idea to Emily when she was visiting in Chicago. And then she came back to Princeton and Cecilia pitched the exact same idea to her. So she was like, okay. So then Emily ended up doing this big study with a blind study in it where we sent out scripts with male and female names on the exact same script. And of course, if it was male, it was more likely to be produced. And they did a Broadway study, which showed that work by women made more money per week, but was closed earlier. And she also did a study of dually, which is like every single script in the English-speaking world, and found that if it was written by a white man, written by a man with a male protagonist, it was most likely to be produced. If it was written by a man with a female protagonist, it was the second most likely to be produced. It was written by a woman with a male protagonist, it was the third likely to be produced. And if it was written by a woman with a female protagonist, it really didn't have much of a shot. So that was pretty shocking. And we got a third New York Times article. So all those articles came out in around a year. Boom, boom, boom. And the next programmable year, it went from 12.5% to 38.9%. It was amazing.
In 1 year?
A year and a half. So, yes. So then at the end of that year, all of the award season happened and they didn't get nominated. And it was bizarre. I mean, that was the year that Annie Baker had 2 plays, Sarah Rule had 2 plays, Becca Brunstadter, it was her first one. Melissa James Gibson's play This was at Playwrights Horizons, was nominated for exactly nothing, even though it was the biggest ticket seller that they had since Grey Gardens, and it wasn't a musical, and it didn't have stars. And the New York Times had called it the best play of the season. I mean, not even nominated by anyone. So we were a little bit shocked by that. And we decided, well, we'll just have our own awards. So Sanford gave us Playwrights Horizons, and we essentially just made a list of people we wanted to give awards to, called them up and said, you want to get an award? And they said, yes, we do. And we booked a party at the West Bank Cafe afterwards. And we were just like, come on, it's free. And we just had our own awards, and it was really fun.
How many years now?
This will be our 10th anniversary this year.
Unbelievable.
And it's really grown since then. Since then, people started coming, and producers like Darryl Roth and Stacey Mindich were like, do we have money? Do you want to give it away? And we're like, yes, we do. So now we have all these grants. The New York Women's Foundation gives us one. So we give, I think, 3 writing awards. Now that we've got a Williamstown Award too. So it's writing, composing. We have the biggest award for a musical theater composer. Design, which is huge because women are so underrepresented there, especially women of color, and directing.
I mean,
almost $100,000 a year.
This is a revolution now. about changing people's lives, changing the face of the American theater, literally, what it looks like, all because of one email and a birthday and, hey, let's get together and bitch, which it seems interesting to me because two major life-changing moments in your life have been someone saying, hey, let's get together and gossip from your first playwriting teacher to now, which is amazing. So talk a little bit about how this...
It's what women do.
How it's evolved into the count and what the count is and this ongoing study.
So the next thing that happened with the Lillys is Lillys were founded by Marsha Norman, Teresa Rebeck, and myself. So it never hurt having those two because they could pull in some power players. So Marsha, we were all on the council at the Guild, and we started talking about Vita had started. You know Vita? Vita is an organization that started literally counting how many contributors there were to The New Yorker and Atlantic and magazines. And I had met with a woman who started that. And so we were like, we should be doing that for theater because the numbers that we pulled for New York City actually made a difference. So why shouldn't we do it for the country? So it was a lot of years of like talking about such a major project. And then Stephen Schwartz just kind of threw up his hands and he was like, you're doing it. I'm like, okay. So we did it together with the Guild. We sort of like ran it, but the Guild gave us resources, people. We used the Guild's representatives across the country to sort of figure out what theaters should be watched across the country. So, and we focus on living writers and the canon that's being created today. So O'Neill's not included, Shakespeare's not included, a lot of, but August Wilson is, so like things that are really happening today. Yeah, that's what it is.
So obviously things are getting better.
Yeah.
But not where they should be.
No.
What can the listeners out there do to help this get a little bit better?
Well, it seems to me like awareness is what's really driving it. And I think also, obviously it's not just the Lillys. There's a big cultural change in the past 10 years with just diversity is, everybody knows what that word means now. Nobody talks about, theater needs to be a meritocracy and men are just better playwrights, which is what they would literally say before, like without any shame whatsoever. So honestly, I think that people need to understand that it's not there yet. And I think everyone needs to understand that the women so far, when I look at, so I went through every single theater for the past 3 years. The women who have benefited the most in the past 3 years are younger women who are just now sort of coming onto the scene. Mostly white women, but women of color too. The women over 50 who really kind of did this have not. So they are missing. And women of color are still really underrepresented. So if we can do two things if we want parity. We can wait for, the older generation to literally die and then keep producing the younger women. Or we could start paying attention to that because everyone's, it's a youth-focused industry. It doesn't really make sense because we're not selling our looks, whatever. You would think that people would get better at writing as they get older, as they do in other genres. But I think the programs, your Juilliards and Yales, and they give producers a curated list to read. And I think the Kilroy's list is compiled from those readers. So it's very skewed, very, very young, very new writer. And if we want parity, you're going to have to include the older generations, and you're going to have to include more women of color of every single age, because that's who's missing.
Do you have any specific stories when you were coming up of facing gender bias very directly, like you said?
Yeah, I wrote a play called Tatiana in Color, which eventually was produced. It took about 10 years. I won some awards. It was in Best Plays of 1997, though it had never been produced. It was very odd. Eventually was, but before it was, when it won an award, there would always be a reading. And I found out from one of the directors of the readings that the artistic director had said, would you like to direct this play? It's very good. It will never be produced. And I had people who would flat out say to me, if you wrote with a male protagonist, it would get done. It's just too much to be female and writing about women. And then, years later, the Emily Sand study was like, it was true. It was factually true. So I literally got really depressed. It'd been 10 years. The two men in my playwriting program at Juilliard were already had full-on careers. It was Stephen Belber and Dave Auburn. And Dave came over to my boat one day and sat on the back. And I was like, I don't know, I might have to quit because this is getting old. 10 years of just nothing. And he said, why don't you just switch the gender? He's like, don't write a different play. Just switch the gender. So I literally did that. I wrote a pretty autobiographical play. And I just made myself a boy. And I called it Boy. I had a production before it was finished being written.
Well, that's not what we want the next generation to have to do. So
I talk to young women now, and they're their jaws hit the floor. They've never heard that. Nobody's ever said anything to them like that.
Partly because of the work that you are doing. So thank you for that. First of all, where can people learn more about the Lillys?
The-lillys.org is our website. And it's everything on there from childcare to harassment stuff to The Count.
And what's coming up next for you?
I'm starting a new musical.
Can you tease anything for us?
I can't really say anything about it yet.
Where can people find out more about your stuff? Website? Are you on the social media?
I'm bad about that. No, I have an agent. That's it.
All right, I'm going to ask you my last question now, which is my genie question. I have a feeling I know what the answer is going to be, but we're going to go for it anyway. So I want you to imagine that the genie from Aladdin comes to visit you. We ask this of all of our guests. And the genie wants to grant you one wish. What's the one thing that makes you so angry about the theater, Broadway in general, that you'd ask this genie to wish away? What gets you frustrated?
Well, I thought you were going to be open-ended, and I was going to go, I want a Great Dane puppy.
Well, you could say that they don't allow Great Dane puppies in the theater.
That's what I really want. In the theater,
and I'm going to say that we know that your frustration about female and gender parity is a big one, but we've covered that, so you can't say that.
Shit. Oops. Can I say that?
Shit all you want. Okay. I love it when we get the explicit rating on iTunes.
This is a little bit weird, but I wish theater was sexier.
In what way?
I don't know. I just think sometimes I think it's just people don't ever write about it.
Write about sex?
Yeah, and it seems kind of weird to me. It seems like I mean, I know it's because it's live. People are like, ew, it doesn't work on stage. But make it work. Figure it out. I don't know. It seems like what a great subject matter, and people don't really do it. And just that's another one we just here you go, film and TV, take it. It's well.
It's a very interesting question because I ran into a white male director that was very nervous in today's day and age to do a play about sex.
Oh, and he flat out said that? He admitted it?
Do you think it's harder to do a story, a play about sex or a musical about sex in today's day and age?
I think there's, plot and sex. We were just okay, film does it better. And I think, well, no, film just does it differently.
Well, there's a challenge.
I mean, every once in a while you see it,
There's a challenge for all the writers out there. Plot and sex from Julia Jordan. Thank you so much for being here. And again, thank you for all the work that you're doing. Go look up the Lillys and check out The Count's fascinating information. A little frightening at times, but it will slap you in the face. And I know for me, the awareness thing, I often, you should go back, everybody, and listen to the Lynn Ahrens podcast that she did with me when I asked her a very similar question. And she asked me right on that podcast how many men and how many women had been on my podcast. And I didn't know the answer. Mm-hmm. And of course, we looked it up, and it was a little more skewed towards men. Yeah. And she wasn't pointing a finger at me, but she was saying, just be aware of that. And it's something we're very aware of now. So all of you out there be more aware of the choices you make when hiring, when picking your podcast guests, and we can all make a difference. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.